good thing that Brian likes talking to bankers because he already wants to buy a lot of our inputs for next year's crop right now.
Well, the only reason why I do is we're trying to get ahead all the time. And if I can cut my input costs a little bit, not that I want to have fewer inputs, I want the very best products, I want the most possible that I can put out there and still increase yield profitably, but I want to buy it at a good price.
Well, and that's the real key. When is the best price? And when you think about almost anything that you're going to buy. Like for example, let's say you want to buy a new winter coat. Probably the best deal might be right now because it's the farthest away from when you're actually going to use it. And if some store has winter coats, well, they'll probably sell it cheap just to get it out of there to make room for stuff that's actually moving right now. With fertilizer and propane, right now is the time that farmers really don't need it. It's a long time until we're going to use it again. And accordingly, oftentimes, it could be the lowest price time of the year.
So I'll go back on this propane thing. Let's start there. That one's relatively simple. Typically, you're going to find the best buy of the year in the middle of the summertime. Now, it doesn't always work out that way, but this is just something that I learned probably 20 years ago from a guy who was in the business, super sharp guy, and my dad and him were talking, and he said, just always buy your propane in July. And yes, you aren't always going to hit the low in the market, but on average, you're going to be lower than just about everybody else. So we've done that ever since, and it's really paid for us. But yeah, I mean, probably 2 years out of 10, we aren't going to quite hit the low. But we do have a good idea at this point what's going to happen with the corn. So if I'm standing in super late planted corn like this in the middle of July, what do you think the odds are that's going to be wet in the fall? Probably pretty high. So chances are I'm going to need some propane come fall. Now last year, when we were in the middle of a drought in July, you could say, ooh, this corn is going to be done real early. Chances are we're not going to need a lot of propane in the fall. So you got to kind of look at these things and weigh it out. This year, if I had to guess, I would guess that propane will probably be less expensive now than in the heart of the fall when everybody wants it.
Well, and one thing too, you can kind of spread your risk out a little bit. Let's just say that you have a very large propane tank at home, but you have to refill it a couple of times. So take at least one load right now, and you can maybe buy another load later on if you need a whole bunch of drying at that time, and you'll spread your risk out a little bit. You get one load bought cheap. Maybe if you have to buy some in the fall, oh, okay, well, I had to pay a little bit more for that, but it's going to average out to be a pretty good price.
The other thing you can do is get a bigger tank. That's what we did on our farm, so we can hold semi-load quantities, and that gets your price down a little bit too, because every time when they bring the semi out, it's a lot less than when they have to bring one of their small trucks out in terms of cost.
Okay, now, sometimes you can buy things ahead, but actually not take them till later. Is
right.
Propane ever one of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we'll typically do in our operation too. Some falls, and probably this one, we have a lot of acres of corn. I look at it and I say, oh man, we didn't get our corn in as early as I would have liked. We had a lot of late day corn. I'm guessing that we're gonna need 3 semi-loads of propane come fall. So we'll take 1 semi-load right now, and then we'll buy the other 2 now for shipment or delivery this fall.
All right, now when we think about fertilizer, this is a little different because you know what, Brent, for our farm, we use a large quantity of fertilizer because we got quite a few acres. And you say, well, man, what am I going to do with all that fertilizer? I don't have this huge facility to store it. What are your options there?
Well, you can store it yourself on your farm. I mean, for us, we've got a couple of old sheds that they're really not that great. I don't mind if we've got some fertilizer in there, and that's what we'll do is store some fertilizer. But here's the way I always look at the fertilizer thing. If we're at just about the all-time high price for fertilizer, do I really want to load up now, or am I head to just kind of gamble and risk it and say, you know, I'm going to take my chances later on? So that's where it gets to be debatable.
Sometimes you take those chances and you get $1,300 phosphorus per ton.
It's possible.
But
yep.
you know, yeah, if you're at the higher price. Now, it's the same thing like with grain marketing. And this is one thing that our dad always told us is, you know, forward contracting's fine, but it better be your dream price. And if you say, well, I can lock in $4 corn, you know, that's nice. But if your dream price is $7, it's probably not the best idea to lock in $4 because you still might get $7, you never know. Now, on fertilizer, it's the same type of thing. If you say, wow, we're way up towards the most I've ever paid for fertilizer, you know, chances are it could come back down and you may just wait and do it later.
So one of the things that we've always looked at is when are all the elevators, when are all the fertilizer dealers in the country loading up? A lot of times that's probably when you want to load up too. So typically on our farm, we're loading up in August and September, and we just encourage you to take a look at it. And maybe you only bring in 10, 20, 30% of your needs and get started that way. But like in our case, we'll bring in 100% of our P&K needs in August and September for some years because we say, well, we think this is a pretty good deal. We want it for tax benefits. We want to have that fertilizer so we can apply it in the fall. I don't want to wait until spring. We want to get our fertilizer out in the fall. I mean, there are just a lot of things for you to weigh out. So the reason why we're talking about all this today is, you know, there's the agronomic side of things, but then there's also the economic side. And we just don't want you to get in too much of a bind on this economic side so you can't do the right agronomic things. So always start out and look at what are the very best things I can do agronomically. Now, how can I get all those things that I want bought at as good a price as possible? And a lot of times buying real early is going to do it. But again, like Darren started with, you probably have to have a good relationship with the banker in order to be able to buy next year's inputs before you've even sold this year's crop.
Now, one last point, Brian, is if you're buying fertilizer at a high price, make sure you're marketing crop at a high price too. We've seen too many guys over the years that maybe they marketed their crop at $5 corn and said, wow, $5 is great, I've never got it, but they didn't buy any fertilizer. Now all of a sudden the fertilizer prices come up to a real high level and the corn went up to $6 and now you aren't in a good position where you can make money anymore. So if you're gonna lock in fertilizer, typically we like to lock in crop at the same time. Now you could certainly do that on the board, or you could actually forward contract at a place you want to deliver to. I mean, that's certainly up to you how you do that. Just consider that. If you're buying fertilizer ahead, you may want to market some crop ahead too.
Well, all these things are nice to talk about and the economics of stuff, but you know what? If you don't have good weed control, you're not going to raise much crop to sell. So we'll talk about how to control this week's weed coming up later in the show.